If you're ready to start working in Mix.NLU, this video is a good place to start. It's good practice to sketch out your NLU model framework before you start building it in the tool. Here's how we typically start. First, a quick reminder. The function of a natural language understanding model is to translate what a user says into intents and concepts that you use to trigger actions in your client. Mix.NLU is the tool we provide for you to build your custom NLU model. The structure of this whole set of information is what we call an ontology. Planning an effective ontology requires coordination between people working on different parts of the language interaction and the client, and often you'll try out several structures before settling on one. We use something called a tagging guide to figure things out. These are the core components of a tagging guide: columns for intents, samples, and concepts, which are the building blocks for an NLU model, and a column for working out how those map to the client's responses. You usually start off with more knowledge of what your product does than of how users will interact with it. So for thinking through the workflow, we're going to temporarily move the actions column over to the left so it appears first. Let's imagine we're speech enabling a little robot that can clean the house. Here are some of his possible actions. Since I'm in the position of guessing about my user's requests, we'll start with a one-to-one mapping between the robot's actions and the intents we want to capture. I know that at the very least, when my users ask for these actions, I want to be able to respond appropriately. Creating intents for them will allow me to do that. Now, the power of natural language understanding is that when users ask for these things, they can speak in their own words. So my next step is to put in some samples of things users might say to express these intents. It's important to note that I'm just guessing what users will say for now. These samples will get refined later once people start interacting with my robot using voice. I'm also providing very limited samples in this demo just to keep things legible. But when you do this, you should aim to create some samples that are as representative as possible and as syntactically varied as possible. You can check out our lesson page for more tips on that. Now let's take a step back and look. Turns out that the intents we've created here have very, very similar samples to one another. That's a good signal that those intents are likely combinable and instead distinguished by a concept or two. Why is that important? If your intents are too similar, as they are here, they're confusable, meaning the model will have a tough time classifying new samples correctly into one or the other intent. You'll end up getting mismatches, and your users won't get the right actions as a result. So let's do this. Here I've collapsed the three intents into one and renamed it a more generic clean_room. Now when I combined the three intents into one, I lost some information. Specifically, now I need a way to tell the robot what room the user wants him to clean. That's where a concept comes in. I've added the concept location to capture the room information. And now that I've done that restructuring, I need to go back and consider the response logic. Clearly, the mapping between actions and intents is no longer one-to-one. So let's rearrange the spreadsheet again and show how the application code for an ontology like this might roughly be structured. This is good to think about here too, even though it's not expressly part of the NLU model that you're going to build in our tool. But if your model requires your app code to start becoming extremely complex, that's a reason that you might rethink how you're approaching it. Now this was a simple example with only a single intent, but hopefully this at least gives you a preview of some things that you want to consider as you play with your structure.